Welcome to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where we trade in personal finance advice for entertaining conversations about money and millennials. Welcome world to yet another episode of our beloved Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. My friend Malcolm Etheridge, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. I'm here.
You're here.
I'm learning the hard way that my, I guess it's my biology, I don't know, has forsaken me because the days of taking naps are over.
Is that right?
I'm not a good nap taker.
How do you know that,
Is that
sir?
a thing, a nap taker? I don't know how you're supposed to say that.
It's interesting, the background behind that comment. I pulled up thinking you and I were going to get to spend some quality time together because you pulled up to the TV studio and you were here early, which in the history of the show never really happened.
All right, it happens occasionally, like, come on.
But Malcolm beat me. He was parked there. I was like, oh, he's already in there chit-chatting and having a good time.
Because that was the only way I was going to make it. If I didn't come right from the meeting I left, I wouldn't have made it.
I see.
It was like,
I see. Well, instead, I was passing his car, and his car was still on. And then I looked in, and then the seat was reclined, and Malcolm was asleep outside the TV studio. So, do you feel better, sir?
Not really. That's my point. Like, I didn't get the nap that I intended to take. I would have been better off, like, I don't know, anything else.
Than a failed nap?
Yeah, I could have, spent that quality time you're talking about.
Excellent. Well, I want to remind people you're listening and watching Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, a show that doubles as a podcast and a television show, where we talk about money, millennials, personal finances, all things involved. My co-host Malcolm here is a licensed financial advisor, and I am the host, I guess, of this show where we talk about money.
You keep us moving.
I do. That's my role.
You smooth us out.
I'm the conductor. Indeed. Well, as we do on every show, it is now time for headlines. This headline for today, Malcolm: why Upwork scratched college degree requirements from their job descriptions. This was a June 2019 piece on Fortune.com by Stephanie. I guess it's Stephanie.
It's probably Stephanie.
Stephanie, but it's missing the Y. There's an E, but no IE, so it kind of threw me. I was thinking, anyway.
Take that up with her parents.
I'm gonna move forward.
Got it.
Recently, some of the country's largest and most successful companies, including Apple and IBM, stopped requiring that applicants possess a college degree for many positions. At Upwork, we have done the same for all positions with our company, removing college degrees as a requirement from our employee job descriptions, and I think this is a representative from Upwork itself. So this is kind of like a company opinion piece, I guess. Increasingly, four-year universities produce too few graduating classes that are reflective of the country's racial, social, and economic diversity. Because of their soaring fees, colleges are pricing themselves out of reach for many Americans. As a result, businesses are in danger of being walled off from huge sections of the American talent pool. The people who may be shunted to the margins of the labor market won't be disqualified for lack of intelligence or skill, but because they simply can't afford to pay for school. More businesses should overhaul their outdated practices and stop pretending that when it comes to the skills they need in employees, there's any correlation between a degree from one of the nation's elite schools and high performance, which is an interesting thing, Malcolm. So I feel like this is a function of a lot of the debate that's been going on around the cost of college and what college is. Do you see traditional college education losing its muster among individuals and even maybe companies that need talent? No?
Not one drop.
Okay, how so?
I think this sounds cute right now while we're in the middle of this super employed phase of life where we are. So unemployment, I think, is at like 3.6% as of Monday of this week.
Very low, record lows.
So it's record lows across the country. And so you have to do things like this.
Right.
As the employer, you have to get creative about the ways that you bring in additional talent that you otherwise wouldn't have looked their way to sneeze. Now we're in a position where that's the case.
Right.
Give us 2 or 3 years, might not even be that long, depending on whether or not they finally wrestle away Trump's Twitter account or not. We'll see. But it'll take a few years for us to get off of that 3.6% and get up.
Right.
And then we'll see if those job requirements don't start to include bachelor's degree, master's degree. In the 70s and 80s, certain jobs also used to say specifically if you didn't go to one of these 8 or 10 schools,
don't apply.
Need not apply.
Right.
I'd be surprised if we didn't get back to that as soon as the economy starts to show some signs of slowing down.
Interesting thought. So essentially, them opening the doors wider is a function of the economy doing so well that we don't have enough workers to actually do the jobs that we need done.
So right now, you're getting people at certain companies that, and you know, you and I'll speak for myself. I won't even say you. We live in a place where we're densely populated. So there's so many people here that could do all of these different jobs. Whereas at other places in Middle America, the structure is spread out, sparse. People just don't exist.
Right.
So you can't really be as picky as you normally would because you don't know when the next person's gonna roll into town with that tumbleweed and be looking for work. So that help wanted sign could be there for 2 years if you try and be too selective.
Right. It's interesting. It makes me think of, I went to a Starbucks recently to do some work, and there was
like a coastal elite.
Indeed, exactly. And there was I guess 2 youngish people talking about, I overheard, talking about like going to school and like what it cost. And I think one of the comments that I heard was, well, I wish I didn't have to take all these classes that don't apply directly to my degree that I'm pursuing. And I've actually had that conversation too, also with colleagues and whatnot, where we talk about like, you can actually cut the fat out of, you know, I'm trying to think of classes I took in college that were just unapplicable to anything I'm doing now. You can shave off 1.5 years to 2 years if you just focus on the core stuff of what you're there to do.
But I think that might be the thing the schools have to do to stay viable.
Okay.
So I think the schools may have to do something so radical as to not include the fluff.
Right.
Where you can graduate in 3 years now instead of 4. Like I had friends in college that graduated in 3 years and I thought they were out of their minds. I was like, why would you want to do that? Now you got to go be an adult a year earlier. Like that's stupid.
Absolutely.
But if you think about it, that extra year, $40,000, $50,000 at some schools that you get to cut off, and you don't waste time studying English for another year, where you took it 4 years in high school, you probably took it in middle school, I'm sure you took it in elementary school. You can probably speak English if you've gone to our K through 12 system.
Right, already.
Why are you taking English in college?
Right.
Things like that you could cut off. There probably is some room to get down to 3 years and get you out of here faster to save you a few dollars. That to me would be the change that colleges could do to stay viable.
Indeed. Speaking specifically about removing the requirement for college or degrees or whatever from job descriptions, do you see other companies moving in this direction? Let's assume that at least it's a trend at the very least. Do you see other companies adopting what Upwork did here?
Well, what I've been hearing about and paying more attention to in like economics blogs and stuff like that is the unskilled labor that's changing.
Okay.
So where folks who have a criminal record or folks who are like high school diploma is their maximum, education achievement. Those folks normally would have been ignored.
Right.
And now these companies are actually changing their policies to include those people, or people who got addicted to painkillers, for example, and maybe had to go to rehab for a while, so they were out of the job market, and now folks are like actually including some sort of rehabilitation program into their job system, just so that they can have folks like factory workers, truck drivers, that unskilled labor, quote unquote, group. That's where I'm hearing and seeing that really dynamic change, that they're like, we got to get somebody. So how do we get flexible enough that we can bring in somebody?
Right, to do the job. Excellent. Well, that's an interesting conversation. It'll be interesting to see what other companies, if any, follow this trend of removing college degrees as a requirement from their job descriptions. It'll be interesting also to see if it's just a trend of the moment and a function of our unemployment rates. Was that something I didn't think about, which is a good point. But I want to remind folks, you are now listening and watching Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. You can always catch episodes of our show on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, and of course all different other podcast platforms. Simply search Manage Your Damn Money. And you can, if you have a question for us, if you have a topic you want us to cover, Send us your suggestion either on social media, or you can send it to us via email, info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. You can always catch us on social media. My handle on Twitter and Instagram is @MYDM1. Malcolm, what's yours?
At Malcolm on Money.
And of course, you can catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/manageyourdamnmoney. This has been MYDM with Ben and Malcolm. We will be right back. Welcome back to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. We're on today's conversation at hand, which I failed to preview in the first segment of the show. Millennials, Generation Z, and the economics of renting in America. The single greatest expense we all face is the cost of keeping a roof over our heads, be it a basement apartment or the basement of your parents' home. Every year we make conscious decisions about where we live, what we're willing to spend, and what we're willing to sacrifice by where we choose to live. In this episode of MYDM, and as the summer months that are ideal for moving to a new spot, we will explore the trends hitting millennials and Generation Z in the renting market in America and explore solutions to rising rents across the land. And this actually, Malcolm, was a show in part inspired by some information shared with us by Apartment List, one of the folks who actually emailed us a bunch of information, or at least emailed me a bunch of information, which is like pertinent to the millennial demographic about what it costs to rent and whatnot. Yeah. The first thing that we pulled for the show was a 2018 Millennial Home Ownership Report. It was called American Dream Delayed, which feels real bleak. In the report, they found 89.4% of millennial renters say they plan to purchase a home at some point in the future, but just 4.4% expect to do so within a year. And of those millennial renters who plan to purchase a home, 48% have zero down payment savings, while just 11% have saved $10,000 or more, Malcolm.
So can I stop you right there?
Absolutely.
How do 89% plan to buy a home, but half of them haven't saved any money toward it?
Well, you know, you
that
can
math
dream.
doesn't add up.
You can dream. And
Okay.
I think this is attached to the dreams that
So
people
you
have.
hope to buy a home,
Absolutely.
not you plan to buy a home, because those are two different things. Hope is not a plan.
That is true, but in the minds of regular people, maybe hope is a plan. Indeed. And also the report pools Apartment List estimates that 67% of prospective millennial home buyers will need more than 2 decades to save a 20% down payment on the median price of a condo in their area, which is more to your point, Malcolm. It's going to take them a long time to get to where they need to be.
But hang on a second. Things have changed since 2010, 11, where everybody like overcorrected from the housing crash to say if you don't have 20% to put down, you can't apply for a loan.
Right.
We've gotten to a point now where about 5% is kind of the threshold that you've got to be able to cross. There are some companies out there right now that'll lend you as much, lend you as much as 97% of the loan to value, which means you've got to bring 3% to the table.
Right.
So the 20% days aren't necessarily where we are anymore.
Right.
But you do still have to have some skin in the game.
Absolutely.
Nobody's going to let you get 100% financing on a new home anymore.
Right. And then the final point we pulled, we understand for too many homeowners, these numbers in some cases are out of reach. So the situation and the question really is, how do you maximize your finances while you're renting? Another story that I pulled, Malcolm, really quickly that I'll highlight, was a story I pulled just before the show.
Yeah, you're going rogue. Okay.
Going rogue just a little bit. It was Gen Z faces even greater pressure on housing affordability and work proximity. This was on BizNow. And it just said a couple highlights. Monthly living expenses, rent, mortgage, utilities, et cetera, are rising at a faster rate than wages for 44% of respondents in a new study from RentPath. And the Generation Z, a label that broadly applies to those born between the mid-90s and the mid-2000s, is the youngest generation in the workforce, and 53% of the respondents from that demographic are seeing rents growing faster. It went into some expenses in terms of how much less people had as it compared to what it costs to pay for rent on a month-to-month basis. But it seems like overall, across the country, renting is getting more expensive. Is that what you've seen, Malcolm?
Oh, absolutely. And it's tough to take it out of DC specifically, where
Right.
we're in one of the probably top 3 most expensive metro areas.
We're struggling for real here.
Right. So from a rent perspective, it's tough not to see it as terrible every
Right.
time I talk to anybody about rents.
Right.
But in general, yes, I think it is getting worse and worse. And the real challenge is, because the developers and the owners and the managers of these properties know that you don't have the means to buy because of all the factors that we've talked about that has screwed a generation or two out of being able to seriously consider buying.
Right.
They have the power.
Right.
So I know that you can't really fight me too much
Right.
on how much I say this place is worth.
Right.
You may have to go get a friend or two together to be able to move into this 1 bedroom, and you guys will flip a coin to decide who gets the closet and who gets the bathroom. But I have the power as the owner of the property, so I can charge whatever I say it is, because what are you gonna do about it? Go to the place across the street that I'm competing with?
Right.
So we're in cahoots
Right.
to some extent. So yes, I absolutely, feel like it's getting out of control, if it's not already out of control, if it's not has been out of control for the last 5 years.
Interesting. Another quick stat, the national median rental price of a 2-bedroom apartment, and this is across the entire country, as of April 30th was like $1,185, which is a pretty significant sum when you think about it. That would be cheap in DC.
Bring that here.
That would be cheap in
Right.
DC. That would be like really cheap in DC. But in other places, relative to what you might pull in terms of income, that is, I can imagine that's, could be a heavy burden to bear.
I hear you
if you
talking,
will.
but I can't get past $11.95. $11.95 will basically buy you that driver's seat I took a nap in here in the nation's capital. So that's stuck in my brain. Anyway, sorry.
Indeed. And then a couple other places, if you're thinking specifically about like where these prices, or the rent prices in particular, have risen over the national average, a list here also by apartment list. Henderson, Nevada, which looks like it's above 4% above the national average. Mesa, Arizona, then Phoenix, Arizona. This is from the highest to the lowest.
Right.
Las Vegas, Nevada, Austin, Texas, Raleigh, North Carolina, Greensboro, Arlington, Texas, Aurora, Colorado, and Stockton, California. So those are all above the national average, it looks like, which is interesting. So we also pulled another story. The rent is too high, so help is on the way in many cities and states. This is a June 2019 piece on Realtor.com by Pamela Ferdinand. As rents surge, more states and cities get involved. In February, Oregon became the first state in the nation to impose statewide limits on how much landlords can raise rents. The move was a response to the surge in median rents in recent years. Colorado also passed a law in May to give renters more rights, including providing more notice before evictions. And then California, where a ballot measure expanded rent control failed in November, lawmakers are weighing a bill to increase protections for tenants. They include proposed legislations that would prevent all owners of residential properties statewide from raising rents more than 5% a year after inflation. And then there's several others. There's one in Illinois considering repealing its ban on rent control. and then it goes on and on. There's a couple more. So it looks like states and municipalities are getting involved now. So how do higher rents, Malcolm, just real basically impact personal budgets?
Excuse me. It affects everything else that you have to spend money on, right? So if rent is supposed to be, by the textbooks that I read to get qualified to be a financial planner, if they're anywhere close to right, about 30% is what you should be spending on your housing expenses.
That's what's said is the average or the ideal.
But if you're spending double that, so you're at 60%, and 25% goes to the government for taxes, what do you have left?
Right, not a lot.
15 to go do everything else in life.
Right.
So realistically, it doesn't add up.
Right. An important detail from 2005 to 2015, the number of units renting for $2,000 or more per month increased by 97%, according to a 2017 study by Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies. Meanwhile, Malcolm, the share renting for less than $800 declined by 2% over the same period. That same report notes that while the overall rental stock increased by more than 6.7 million housing units, the number of units renting for less than $800 declined by more than 260,000. So literally more affordable rental units are going down at the very same time that more expensive rental units are going up. So it's interesting, Malcolm, because I have an interesting story when it comes to renting to save to buy a home. My wife and I lived in an apartment building that was rent controlled in a rent controlled area, and it was literally the primary reason why we were able to afford to buy our house, because we were living.
Interesting.
We didn't have granite countertops, is what I always tell people. We also had the radiators for heat, and sometimes when it got too hot, we had to open up the window in the wintertime.
Is this your uphill both ways story you're gonna tell your kids?
I don't even know what uphill both ways means, so.
Okay.
It's not one of your old man expressions.
In the break, I'll explain it to you.
I appreciate that. But it was literally, we were living, it was one bedroom. There were a lot of inconveniences, but it was the reason we were able to save. When we told people what we paid in rent, and when we left, she had been there like maybe 5-6 years. When we left, we were paying $900 per month with utilities included. So that was like the one.
Getting away with murder, basically.
In DC, absolutely. And so there's this natural tension where unless you're able to save by living at home or living in a cheap enough place, you're not able to amass the amount that you need to buy a home, which then keeps you in renting.
Well, also, like, how do you get started?
Right.
So what you're talking about is you guys getting started 6, 7, 8 years ago, before this trend that we're talking about really took fire.
Right.
So you weren't coming out of school and looking for a place to rent at the height of
Out the gate.
this outrageous rental market.
That's true.
Where if you're graduating from grad school like you did now, you'd be up the creek.
Yeah, really.
Because situations like what you just described really don't exist anymore.
Right.
Unless you're willing to go live like way out in the outskirts of town,
Right.
or somewhere in the hood that like nobody's coming to visit you.
Right.
But otherwise, like, you don't have those kind of options. And so that's why I say, like, you end up 3 deep in a 1 bedroom, or you have to live with your parents much longer than you would prefer.
Right.
Or those are my 2, you know,
Those
like,
are the
so
options.
then, like, you know, so I just think, you know, 5 or 6 short years ago,
Right.
things like that, what you're talking about, were a lot more viable than they are even now, which
Right.
is amazing, because like that's not that long ago.
Right. Interesting. So when you see a rental market like it is, and you know it's really bad in DC where we live, but it's trending in other places. Obviously, people hear the stories of New York and also San Francisco, and it's trending like that nationwide. How do you see this nationwide trend of like high rental rates affecting wealth creation for the millennial and then Generation Z?
It delays it so much longer. So your primary residence for a lot of people, when you look at their personal balance sheet, is the biggest glaring source of your own personal net worth. So if you have a net worth of $200,000, 150,000 of that would be attributable to the equity in your home, because you've been in that house for 15 years or whatever and had a chance to pay down the mortgage and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So without incorporating that into a person's balance sheet and to that person's net worth, there's nothing there to build on, to feel good about, to continue to go down that path. So it has severely delayed that wealth creation opportunity for a lot of people, because like I said, it's going to be, for most people, your number one biggest asset.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we're going to take another quick music break, and we're going to continue to discuss millennials, Generation Z, and the economics of renting in America. But before we do that, I want to remind you can always catch past episodes of our show on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify, and any other of your favorite podcast listening platforms. Simply Google Manage Your Damn Money or type it into your platform. If you have a question that you want us to answer, or you have a topic you want us to cover, send it to us, info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. You can always catch us on social media. My handle is @MYDM with a 1 on the end. That's on Twitter and Instagram. Malcolm, how about you?
@MalcolmOnMoney.
And you can always catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/manageyourdamnmoney. This is MYDM with Ben and Malcolm. We will be right back. Welcome back to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where we are talking about millennials, Generation Z, and the economics of renting. Malcolm, another story that we pulled for this show, forget owning, renting is becoming the end game for many millennials and baby boomers. And this was a May 2018 piece on the Washington Post by Robert Pennegar. It read, instead of viewing renting as a short-term phase, an increasing number of residents are choosing rental housing specifically because it offers a more flexible lifestyle than home ownership. The number one item, Malcolm, that it mentioned was the mobility that's needed. Regardless of age, mobility is one of the top reasons people decide to rent. For millennials just entering the workforce or in the process of building their careers, the ability to relocate is a major factor, which I have experienced myself as a young person coming up. Even if they are in a financial position to purchase a home, millennials may choose to rent to have the flexibility to take advantage of new job opportunities as they arise. Also, transportation and accessibility play an important role. With busier than ever lifestyles, more and more people are simply refusing to spend hours commuting every day. I feel like that's a huge driver of like renters, especially in city spaces like DC or New York. You do not want to be in your car or on the train for hours on end. That's no fun at all.
I'm like trying to re-architect my entire life around not being stuck on the beltway or the highway or whatever for over an hour.
And it's hard.
And over an hour in each direction, right? So that's 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, 10 hours. That's a whole day of work that I spend in my car.
Wow.
So if you think about it in that frame,
right,
it makes sense that people are trying to figure out ways to get out of that.
Right. The people listening to our show in Los Angeles, Southern California, Los Angeles know what we're talking about.
Even Atlanta. Like the traffic is terrible most places now.
Indeed. Also, Another item that was mentioned, the convenience of living in the middle of things. Similarly, we're seeing residents choose renting over home ownership for the sake of convenience. For busy boomers who are ready to give up the yard work and other home maintenance tasks, renting is an attractive alternative. If something breaks or goes wrong, all they have to do is pick up the phone and call the property manager to take care of it. The same goes for young professionals who may lack the time, experience, or willingness to address the issues. I can't even tighten the knob on the doors at my house. So like, I don't even know, where do you start with that?
Home Depot has classes.
Okay, well, maybe I'll look into those or not. So do you see, Malcolm, long-term renters becoming, or long-term renting, becoming something of a viable pathway to like financial freedom in some ways?
I do and I don't. It's dangerous.
Okay.
Because like I said, you're not in, my biggest issue with renting is that you're not in control of your costs.
Right.
If there were a way to lock in a 10 or a 15-year lease,
Right.
I probably wouldn't need to own a home.
Right.
But the fact that your landlord has the ability to, at the drop of a hat in a lot of situations, decide that today's the day,
Right.
and now I need
15%.
5% more than I needed 6 months ago,
Right.
and now I need 5% more than I needed 12 months ago. And you play that game enough times,
Right.
it's like, you're talking to somebody who moved, I think, 3 times within 1 square mile of each apartment just to get that incentive you get from moving into a new apartment.
Right.
So that 1 or 2 months of free rent that you spread across that makes the difference.
Right.
I moved 3 times for that in the city. Like,
Just
so,
to save the money on the front end, because you know you're not going to get that from the place that you're already
and
in.
I also know I'm not going to stay. So every time I move, I don't accumulate any extra stuff because I just got to pack it up and do it again. So I became an expert at moving my stuff every 12 to 15 months.
That's
just
hilarious.
because I was not going to stay long enough for them to,
Right.
So I just think, the predictability of that cost is a barrier that would keep people from being able to rent long-term like what you're talking about.
Right. Now, another component of this conversation is this particular article was saying more people want to rent because it's more convenient. One of the things that were raised was the cost of maintenance on a home, particularly like an older home, might outweigh the cost of actually renting on a month-to-month basis if you were to like balance it out over the course of an entire year or maybe several years. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't disagree with that. And I think traditionally, the only way you'd be able to buy a home is if it were older and something was wrong with it and nobody else wanted it. But we're in a place now where there's so many people that are cash rich, developers, house flippers and whatever other kind of people have created a profession that has created a TV show, that has created a cult following. Right. Those folks come in, take that raggedy home that you normally would have been the only person interested in buying and living in, turn it into, now it's not a $300,000 starter home, it's an $800,000 jewel in the neighborhood, and you're priced out of being able to move into it. And so now, I actually think what's interesting, you and I have both experienced this now, a more viable option is a new build.
Right.
Not necessarily a new build in the sense that you go out and contract someone to build the house for you from scratch, but somebody who's saying, I have this plot of land, I don't have anything else to do with this land, I'm going to build 200 or 500 or whatever townhouses on this land, and now you have a new house. It's predictable from a maintenance standpoint that within the first 5 to 10 years, there's very minimal that's likely to go wrong with the house. So now all you really have to worry about is paying your mortgage and praying to God that your homeowners association doesn't raise your fees at some astronomical rate that makes it cost prohibitive, which is not impossible.
I'm on the board of mine.
Of course you are. So let's now hope that you don't get outvoted. But you know what I mean? Like at that point, you're bought in and you're somewhat fixed in your costs, that the mortgage is all you really have to worry about. That kind of changes that paradigm of now I've got to worry about maintenance every single month or every 3 months or whatever, and something always coming up. To the extent that I think that becomes maybe the new normal for at least older young folks like us looking to buy.
And another interesting pitfall of renting long term, I think one of the greatest things that I think about, when I think about our $900 apartment, one thing that always loomed in the back of my head was the person who owns this particular building is not guaranteed to own this building tomorrow. And that person could literally sell the building to someone else and decide I want to knock this whole thing down. Because obviously the person who owns it was like, I'm gonna just have this, it's just an asset that gives him income on a regular basis, right? But somebody can come and say, no, I want more money, let's knock it down, let's rebuild it, and let's charge market rate or close to market rate, and that would have changed it. And I think people don't always know that on the back end, these properties can flip hands and change hands.
I actually heard that story recently.
What's that?
A friend of mine lived in a house, a quadplex, I guess. It's 4 apartments in one structure in DC that he had been in for like 6 years.
Right.
And he knew at that point personally the owner who he was renting from. Like he wrote him a check personally for his rent every month.
All right.
The guy died.
Wow.
His 2 sons took over. We want market rent.
Wow.
We don't care that our dad was a nice guy and was allowing you to pay what you paid when you first moved in. And they kind of had an agreement that anything that you can fix, you fix. You don't call me.
Right.
In exchange for that, I'll keep the rent where it was when you moved in, back in like 2012 or so.
Wow.
As soon as the guy died, his sons came in. No, we want market rent, which is about $450 more, and we want it tomorrow. So in a situation like that, you're absolutely right, and it kind of gets at what I was saying. Like, you're not in control of your fixed expenses anymore.
Right.
That's a scary place to be for me.
And the max lease you can do now, I mean, I haven't been in the leasing market for a while, but I feel like 2, potentially 3 is the max you're gonna get out of a place that's trying to rent a space. But you're not gonna get beyond that unless you're dealing with somebody on a one-on-one basis for their particular property. So a couple of things we wanted to mention. If renting is the housing poison, you have to choose, how do you maximize it for your personal finances, Malcolm? And that's always the question that we're trying to answer here on MYDM. The first element, which you kind of alluded to, shop around. What does that mean when we're talking about shopping around for where to live?
Well, I mean, you can and you can't, because I know, excuse me, I know this now from like back and forth negotiations with my building a few different times, the management people of the building that I was leasing at the time. They have updated numbers that come to them like every Monday on the 100 closest apartments similar to theirs. And so they know price per square foot what everybody else is leasing for at any given time. And everybody uses the same report to determine how much they're gonna price their apartments for. So if my proximity to the metro is 30 steps more than the one down the street from me, I charge $5 less and call it a day. Or if I'm right on top of the metro, then I charge $5 more and you're gonna pay it because you don't have to cross the street or whatever. So they've already got it worked out to the point that I know roughly what the market has dictated in my neighbor's apartment building. So I now have the data I need to determine what it's gonna take to get you in here. So you have some flexibility if you're moving in at the right time and they really need to lease that place up, but not a lot. You don't have a lot of power.
Well, and then also the other side of that, because you mentioned negotiating terms of renting. That you might not be able to negotiate on price too much, but especially in a city like apartment building, you can go for things like free months of rent, foregoing deposits maybe, locking in your amount of rent per month on a multi-year basis, so rather than just doing a 12-month thing, you do a 2-year thing. And you can use other offers against others to try to find current, you can also, so you can use like, well, they're gonna give me, 30 days rent free. And then you can go in there and say, well, this building across the street, as you mentioned, is gonna give me 30 days rent free. Sometimes they do that, and a lot of that, like you said, Malcolm, is market dependent, but it's still something you can try. Another thing that's really important, you gotta find out the occupancy levels of these buildings, which is a huge deal, because some places, especially once you get out from the center of cities, aren't necessarily fully occupied. I know where I live, I understand there's a building that's like adjacent to our community, and from what I understand, from what I heard through the grapevine, it was only at the time like 35% leased. So you can like literally walk in there and set your table for what you want. Maybe not so much on price, but maybe on perks, like give me a free parking space or give me this, give me that.
So the time of year matters. So the colder it is outside, the fewer people there are shopping around trying to find a new apartment.
Nobody's trying to move in the dead of winter.
Nobody's coming into that leasing office saying, hey, I'd like to lease an apartment.
Right.
And so you're it.
Right.
And so they tend to be a lot more flexible in those months where
Right.
they don't want to risk having somebody moving out
Right.
in October, November, December, and nobody to replace them until March, April, May.
Right.
And so that's also the timing of your move could matter too if you have the flexibility.
Absolutely. Also, you can consider non-traditional rentals, and that's basement apartments, homes split between friends, and then of course living at home and paying mom and dad a small portion of your income, or they might just let you live there for free because they love you. That's another thing. Have you ever lived in anywhere that was quote unquote non-traditional? I know you have actually.
Non-traditional.
Meaning not on your own in an apartment in a building.
No.
You lived
Well,
at home, didn't you?
Oh, that's traditional.
I mean, it's
think.
traditional, but not, you know?
Oh, okay.
You lived at home.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But that's not, to me, that's traditional.
Okay,
Like,
fine. I miscategorized that. And then also you can consider biting the bullet and commuting. The single greatest determinant for most of the cost of where you live is where it's located. If you can stand to live further out, you can get better pricing. And another time I was paying somewhere in the 800-ish. And even my rent at
And you were commuting 2 hours
Wait.
in each direction.
It was something like that. I was living in Gaithersburg, Maryland when I first got to DC. Well, around when I first got to DC. And now I wasn't working in the city then.
Mm-hmm.
I was working at a mall that was like a 10-minute drive down the road, but that's neither here nor there. And I was paying when I came in, because I got the deal, the like rent now and we'll let you pay this. I think I was paying $698 a month, at least for that first year, and then it went up after that. But I was all the way out in the sticks.
What kind of amenities did this place have?
It was still the nicest apartment I've ever lived in.
Okay.
Personally, it had carpet, central AC, central heating. It was very nice. I love that apartment. But it was really far out. And then when I started working in the city, that commute by bus and by train, whoo boy, man.
So you made me think about something though. These buildings that they have put up in the city that have a pool on the roof and a mini bar outside and like grills and patios and speaker systems and world-class gyms and all this kind of stuff that increases the cost of having that apartment, where they're saying this is what millennials want.
Right.
And I remember every time I would walk past the gym that I never used or the pool that I never swam in or something, I would prefer a package that said, you can't use any of our stuff,
Right.
and we'll reduce your rent by whatever that proportional cost is to us.
Right.
Because I wasn't gonna use it,
Right.
and I have a feeling that most of the people in those buildings don't use it either.
Right.
But things like insuring a swimming pool,
Right.
cleaning the swimming pool,
Right.
all that kind of stuff is expensive, and I believe that people would move into your building even if you didn't have it. So bring the cost down,
Right.
bring down the fluff,
Right.
and there's your affordability right
Built
there.
in. Indeed, indeed. Another element that you should consider a roommate to split the cost. I think that's pretty common thought.
Yeah, that's
especially-
not even like a new.
It's not a new thing.
Thought.
When you get out of college or whatever, like that's probably one of the first things you should be thinking about. And of course, strongly consider what's convenient or what's not totally necessary to advance your financial cause. It's interesting because now that I'm 32, I'm married and I have somehow 3 kids. I look at life through with a hindsight kind of thing, and now my wife and I look at things and we're like, wow, we really should have just finished my in-laws' basement and then lived in there for a few years, paid off some stuff, and but hindsight, but it doesn't make sense either because we didn't need to at the time to do that. But now hindsight, we're like, well, maybe we should have done that. Maybe we should have made the sacrifice. I don't know. That's an interesting thought for me.
I think there's one before we leave the topic. I think that there's one person or one type of person that I think we missed in this whole scenario. Excuse me, which is the person who it makes sense for you to rent and you can afford to buy. The person who, because we always talk about how millennials aren't fixed objects anymore. Like, our parents signed up for a 30-year mortgage with the intent of living in the house for 30 plus years and paying it off.
Right.
Whereas now it's like, no, I came to do 4 or 5 years at Amazon, for example, which is going to be in Arlington, Virginia,
Right.
but then I'm going to move to Seattle,
Right.
or then I'm going to move to Houston, Texas, or then and I already know that coming into it.
Right.
So I have no intentions to buy anything, because why would I? I get locked into a mortgage that if at the time I decide I'm ready to go, the housing market is down, I'm screwed.
Right.
So it makes sense for me to continue renting. In that scenario, it's not in the cards for you to buy a house.
Right.
So there is that person that, you know, we completely neglected that
Well,
might be listening to this going, I could buy if I wanted to.
That's true. And I would say, hold your cards and hold your money, because it gains interest in your savings or wherever else, and that's a good idea. But anyway, I don't even know what else I was gonna say about that, because I had a thought, but I can't remember. And with that, we'll close this show, because my mind's not
You
working.
turned into the old man you just pretended to be.
Indeed.
At the wise age of 32, and then all of a sudden you turn 64.
Right,
Got
indeed.
it. Okay.
Well, we want to close the show by reminding folks you can catch our show on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, and also please leave us a review on any of those platforms. That helps more people catch the show. And of course, you can send questions or things that you want us to cover to info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. You can always catch us on the gram or on Twitter. My handle is @MYDM with a 1 on the end. Malcolm, how about yours?
At Malcolm on Money.
Of course, you can catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/manageyourdamnmoney. Thanks once again to our partners here at Montgomery Community Media. Until next time, be good with your money.